The Book of Enoch was erased from the Bible, hidden, forbidden, almost forgotten. Yet within its lost pages lie stories of angels who fell, giants who ruled the earth, and a man who may have walked among the stars. Welcome to the Night Library, a quiet place where forbidden history whispers through candlelight. Tonight, we'll drift through 30 forgotten secrets from the ancient Book of Enoch, tales that stretch between heaven and earth, faith and science, myth and memory. Let your thought slow down. Let curiosity replace fear. Fact 1. Different Bibles, 66 verses 73. We imagine the Bible as a single, sacred book, unchanged and eternal. But it isn't. It's a library with missing rooms. Protestants hold 66 books as divine. Catholics, 73. 7 lost texts, gone not by fire, but by decision. They called them apocrypha, works too complex, too questioning. Some described angels walking among men. Others revealed visions of the cosmos long before Galileo ever raised his eyes to the sky. These books weren't destroyed. They were set aside, hidden in monasteries, buried in caves, sealed by those who feared what they might awaken. The Bible we read is not false. It is simply incomplete. A story edited by centuries. Its lost chapters still whispering through time. Fact 2. The radical versions, the forgotten Gospels. In the shadows of Scripture lie Gospels the world was told to forget. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is not meek. He is fierce, cryptic, human. He speaks of light hidden inside each soul, of divine fire that can't be contained by temples or priests. In the Gospel of Barnabas, a darker twist. Jesus does not die on the cross. He escapes. It is Judas who is crucified in his place. If true, it changes everything. Redemption becomes rebellion. Faith becomes choice. For the church, such ideas were unbearable, so the texts were silenced, their pages fading into rumor and dust, but even ashes remember the fire. And these Gospels still glow faintly like embers under centuries of denial. If you're still awake, you're one of us. Quiet minds exploring ancient mysteries. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Just hit it into comments. It helps me imagine how far this library of calm curiosity has reached. And if you enjoy calm science stories, please like and subscribe. It helps keep the candles burning here in the Night Library. Fact 3. Why the church was uncomfortable. Power fears questions more than answers, and the Apocrypha asked the wrong ones. What if angels could fall? What if heaven itself had secrets? What if God's order was not perfect, but evolving? The Book of Enoch told of angels who took mortal wives, of giants born of their union, and of a world punished by a flood not for man's sin, but for heaven's. To accept that was to shatter centuries of doctrine, for if the divine could err, then faith was no longer obedience. It was choice. So the church buried the books, declared them blasphemy, and yet the words survived, etched on desert scrolls, hidden in monasteries, and whispered among those who could not forget. The forbidden texts remind us what is heresy in one age may be revelation in another. Fact 4. The Dead Sea discovery. It began with an accident. In 1946, a young Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave and heard the sound of shattering pottery. Inside were clay jars, sealed for 2,000 years, and within them, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among fragments of ancient Hebrew texts was something the world thought lost forever, the Book of Enoch. The discovery sent shock waves through theology. Here was a scripture older than Moses, written before the flood was myth. Before history had a name, the scrolls described a world watched from above by beings who descended through clouds, taught humankind secrets of heaven, and broke laws older than sin itself. Scholars called it myth. The church called it dangerous. But those fragile scraps of parchment refused to fade. Buried in desert silence, they waited for an age that would once again look up at the stars and wonder. Fact 5. Who Enoch was in the canon. In the Bible, Enoch is barely there, a shadow passing through 5 short verses. He was said to be the great-grandfather of Noah, a righteous man who walked with God, and then, mysteriously, was no more. No death, no burial, just gone. That phrase, walked with God, has puzzled theologians for centuries. Was it a metaphor for faith, or a literal journey beyond the earth? If you count backward through the generations, Enoch would have lived in a world that still remembered Eden's light, a time when heaven and earth were not yet strangers. In those few words, the canon hides a crack in reality, a mortal who crossed the line between divine and human and never came back. Fact 6. Enoch beyond the Bible. Outside the Bible, Enoch refuses to vanish. His name reappears, carved, whispered, inscribed on relics across ancient worlds. Egyptian chronicles speak of a wise builder who helped raise the pyramids, a man of impossible knowledge, known by a name that sounds like Enoch. On a Sumerian prism, a king list etched in cuneiform, appears a figure with the same description, a ruler who lived before the flood and walked among the gods. Coincidence or memory? Across cultures that never met, a single archetype emerges, the man who knew too much, who touched the sky and returned with secrets. Perhaps Enoch was not forgotten, only renamed. Perhaps his story was too vast to fit inside a single faith. Fact 7. The world before the flood. Before Noah, before the deluge, the earth was ruled by something else. The Book of Enoch opens a chapter the Bible only hints at, a lost age between creation and destruction, a time when humanity still spoke to the heavens and the boundaries between gods and mortals had not yet hardened. According to the text, this was a civilization of brilliance and decay, a world advanced in craft, art, and knowledge, but corrupted by the beings who descended from above. The Watchers, as Enoch called them, taught humankind forbidden sciences, astrology, metalwork, sorcery, healing, technologies of both wonder and ruin. This era, the antediluvian world, was erased by the flood, but echoes of it survive in every culture, in Mesopotamia's kings before the waters, in Atlantis, in India's golden yugas. Perhaps the deluge wasn't the beginning of history, but the end of something greater, a civilization too close to heaven for its own survival. Fact 8. The sons of God and the daughters of men. In Genesis, it's just one line. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they took them as wives. In Enoch, it's an entire revelation. Those sons of God were angels, not spirits of light, but beings of flesh. They fell from heaven, drawn by desire, and their leader, Semyaza, bound them with an oath on Mount Hermon, never to return. From these unions came the Nephilim, giants born of two worlds, half divine, half human. They ruled the earth with power and cruelty, devouring the world that gave them life. The myth of the Nephilim echoes everywhere, in Greek titans, in Babylon's Apkallu, in the demigods of Africa and the Americas. Whether angels or something else entirely, Their story marks the first rebellion of heaven against its own laws, and the first time humanity learned what happens when gods fall in love with mortals. Fact 9. Semyaza and the forbidden knowledge. Every fall begins with curiosity. Under their leader, Semyaza, 200 watchers descended upon Mount Hermon. They came not as spirits, but as teachers. They gave humankind knowledge, how to forge weapons from metal, how to use plants for medicine and poison, how to read the stars, and even how to summon hidden forces of the earth. But wisdom has a cost. What began as enlightenment became domination. Those who learned fastest ruled the slow. The strong enslaved the weak. Enoch writes that injustice multiplied until even the earth cried out to heaven. The angels' children, the giants, consumed everything, crops, animals, and finally man himself. It was then, the text says, that God decided to cleanse the world, to drown sin and the science that birthed it. Modern readers see in this a warning older than myth. Knowledge without balance destroys its own creator. Fact 10. The origin of the giants. In the Book of Enoch, the flood wasn't humanity's first tragedy. It was the consequence of what came before, the age of the giants. When the Watchers, angels bound to earth, took mortal women, they created a new species, Nephilim. These beings, vast in size and strength, hungered endlessly, devouring everything their world could give. Enoch describes them as rulers and destroyers, giants who enslaved humankind, and, when food ran out, turned upon flesh itself. Archaeological legends across continents echo their image. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the Titans of Greece, the star-born kings of Africa and the Americas. Ancient burial mounds in North America, once rumored to hold towering skeletons, fed the same fascination that maybe, in some forgotten era, giants walked beside men. Whether myth or memory, the Nephilim embody a warning older than Genesis. When power is born without restraint, it consumes even its creators. Fact 11. The Flood, a divine reset. The story of Noah's Ark is familiar: rain, a boat, and survival. But Enoch tells us why the flood truly came. It wasn't human sin that doomed the world. It was celestial interference. The earth, corrupted by the offspring of angels, had become a laboratory of violence. In Enoch's vision, God commands his archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, to purge creation itself. Raphael binds the fallen ones in the valleys of the earth. Gabriel destroys the Nephilim in their war against men. And the waters come to wash away what heaven could not forgive. The flood, then, was not punishment, but cleansing, a reset of creation, a reboot of balance. Afterward, the giants vanished from the earth, or almost vanished, because Enoch hints that their spirits remained, restless, half-divine shadows that still wander among us. Fact 12. The echo in Scripture, legitimacy and rejection. If the Book of Enoch was truly heresy, why do traces of it remain inside the Bible itself? In the Epistle of Jude, verse 14, quotes Enoch word for word. Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones. A clear line lifted from the forbidden text. Even the New Testament writers knew his story. Early church fathers, Tertullian, Origen, and Clement, treated Enoch as sacred history, not myth. But centuries later, as the church tightened its canon, the book was silenced. Only one branch kept it alive, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which still includes the Book of Enoch in its Bible today. Their priests say it was never apocryphal. It was simply too vast for the rest of the world to understand. And perhaps they're right. Because every time Enoch reappears, he brings with him a vision of faith that refuses to stay buried. Fact 13. The critics and the forgery. When the Book of Enoch resurfaced in Europe, it didn't come quietly. In 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce brought back 3 copies of an ancient Ethiopian manuscript, a text long thought destroyed. By the 19th century, theologians were alarmed. Its content, angels of flesh, forbidden knowledge, cosmic journeys, didn't fit any doctrine. British scholar Richard Lawrence, the first to translate it into English, admitted he replaced whole lines he couldn't understand. Later, translators did the same, filling gaps with their own theology. By 1898, critics like Henry Hyman argued it was never written by one man, but by several across centuries. They called it a fraud, a patchwork of myth and magic, and yet the core ideas matched fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, predating Christ himself. If it was forgery, it was forged before history began. Even now, scholars debate who wrote it, prophets or poets. Perhaps the real question isn't who authored Enoch, but who tried so hard to silence him. Fact 14. Giants across the world. Every culture remembers them, giants who shaped mountains, fought gods, and taught mankind the arts of survival and war. In Africa, the Bambara tell of Mambo, a celestial being so large his footsteps carved valleys. In China, myths speak of Pongu, a giant who split the heavens and the earth, forming light and darkness, yin and yang. In Greece, they were titans, beings of divine blood who defied the gods of Olympus. Separated by oceans, they share the same anatomy of myth, skyborn, powerful, and doomed to fall. Enoch's Nephilim fit perfectly among them. Perhaps not copies, but memories of the same ancient event, recorded by eyes scattered across the world. It's as if humanity remembers a single, forgotten age when the boundary between heaven and earth was crossed and never fully closed. Fact 15. The Titans and Tartarus. In Greek myth, the Titans rose against Zeus and were cast down into Tartarus, a deep abyss beneath the earth, sealed in chains of fire and darkness. Enoch's vision describes something eerily similar. The watchers who defied heaven are bound in the valleys of the earth, their faces covered, their voices silenced until the day of judgment. The symmetry is too precise to ignore. 2 civilizations, worlds apart, telling the same story in different tongues, divine rebellion, punishment beneath the ground, and eternal imprisonment. Archaeologists dismiss it as coincidence. Theologians call it universal metaphor. But ancient people weren't writing poetry. They were recording what they believed they saw. In the silence of stone and scripture, the same echoes repeat. Those who rose against the gods were never destroyed, only buried deep enough for us to forget. Fact 16. The archaeology of giants in folklore. Long before museums and universities, the earth itself was the first archive. Across continents, myths tell of enormous graves, burial mounds where the bones of ancient kings lay surrounded by ornaments, weapons, and offerings. In the 19th century, American newspapers reported strange finds in the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, skeletons over 2 meters tall, adorned with copper bracelets and mica necklaces. To local tribes, these weren't myths, they were memories. Some legends called them the first people, others sky children. They were said to rule humans, to build the great mounds, and to vanish in the flood of fire or water. No verified remains of Nephilim were ever confirmed, yet the fascination persists. Because the artifacts, the carvings, the inexplicable scale of ancient works, from Baalbek stones to the Serpent Mound, still whisper of builders who were more than human. Perhaps these stories are not proof, but residue, the cultural memory of a world that once looked giants in the eye. Fact 17. The possible survivors. If the flood erased the age of the giants, why do stories of them continue after it? The Book of Enoch hints that not all Nephilim were destroyed, that some escaped divine punishment, hidden in distant lands. Genesis itself mentions their descendants. The giants were on the earth in those days and also after. In Canaan, they were called Rephaim, the shades. In ancient Hebrew, the word also means spirits of the dead. Were they survivors or remnants, ghostly echoes of a vanished race? Later myth transformed them into kings and gods. Og of Bashan, the last giant. The Anakim, men of measure. Even David's foe, Goliath, is written as a trace of that bloodline. Perhaps some lived on through legend, others through DNA. The bones are gone, but in myth, their shadows never drowned. Fact 18. Angels or aliens? This is where faith and science collide. For centuries, readers of Enoch saw angels, beings of light who fell through pride. But modern interpreters see something stranger, a record of encounter. The watchers descend from the sky. They bring knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, sciences unknown to early humanity. They teach languages, calendars, the movement of stars. They move in luminous palaces that cross the heavens. Ancient people described them as best they could, with the words of gods. But what if they were describing technology? Astronomer Carl Sagan once warned that myth might preserve distorted memories of ancient contact with advanced beings. Ezekiel's fiery wheels, the chariots of the gods, the shining beings of Enoch, perhaps they were not divine, but distant relatives, visitors mistaken for angels. Faith calls it heresy. Science calls it hypothesis. But both agree, whatever came from the sky changed the course of humanity forever. Fact 19. Astronomy before astronomers. In an age when the night sky was a mystery, Enoch wrote about it as if he had seen it from above. In the section called the Book of the Luminaries, he describes the movements of the sun and moon with a precision unthinkable for his time. He writes that the moon borrows its light from the sun, a truth humanity wouldn't rediscover until more than 3,000 years later. He notes the shifting of shadows, the pattern of seasons, and the gates through which celestial bodies rise and set, perhaps ancient metaphors for orbital paths. In a world that thought the earth flat and motionless, Enoch hinted that it was round, that it moved around its own source of light. How could a man of the 3rd millennium BCE know this? Chance, revelation, or something he witnessed with his own eyes from somewhere no man had ever stood before. Fact 20. The classification of stars. In one fragment of the Book of Enoch, the writer describes stars as beings with different weight, light, and distance. For centuries, theologians dismissed it as poetic language, but in modern terms, these are the very parameters astronomers use to classify stars: mass, luminosity, and distance. Enoch even refers to wandering stars, the ancient word for planets. He speaks of them as errant lights that do not follow the order of heaven. To call them wanderers was heresy then, but astronomy today confirms it. Planets break, from the fixed pattern of constellations moving independently through the night sky. Whether Enoch's insight came from revelation or from records older than known civilization, no one can say. But his description remains one of the earliest attempts to map the architecture of the cosmos, centuries before Pythagoras, millennia before Copernicus. Fact 21. The solar and lunar calculations. One of the strangest sections of the Book of Enoch is not a vision, but a calendar. He writes of the paths of the sun and moon, of cycles that repeat every 364 days, a system based on observation, not myth. It divides the year into precise seasons, aligns solstices and equinoxes, and calculates lunar phases within a solar rhythm. Modern research has found that this Enochian calendar differs by only 1 day from our modern solar year. In an age without telescopes, such precision would have required long-term astronomical tracking or external guidance. The ancient Ethiopians still use a variation of this system today. Some call it divine inspiration. Others, a mathematical legacy from a civilization whose memory has long since drowned beneath the flood of time. Fact 22. The treasury of light and thunder. Among Enoch's most puzzling visions is his account of the treasuries of light and thunder. He describes watching from above as light gathered between the clouds, flashing downward to earth in waves. It sounds like divine poetry until you realize it's a description of lightning formation as seen from above the storm. Modern astronauts on the International Space Station report the same phenomenon. Luminous bursts of energy called sprites and blue jets, flickering high in the atmosphere. But Enoch lived thousands of years before aviation, before flight, before the concept of orbit. How could he have seen lightning from that vantage point? He writes that the highest showed me the place where light is born and darkness is divided. The words carry an almost scientific weight, a vision of weather from the stratosphere. Perhaps he was describing divine revelation, or perhaps, for a brief moment, human eyes truly looked down upon the clouds. Fact 23. The flying palace of the Most High. Then comes the passage that unsettles even the faithful. Enoch writes of being taken up to see the dwelling of the Most High, a radiant palace of glass and fire, cold as snow, bright as the sun. Its floor and walls were of crystal that shone like ice, and it moved through the heavens. To theologians, it is a metaphor for God's glory. To historians of technology, it sounds eerily like a description of an illuminated structure, metallic, self-moving, radiant, yet cool. Enoch calls it the chariot of the Great One. 1,000 years later, the prophet Ezekiel would describe the same vision: wheels within wheels, creatures of light and fire, and a voice that thundered like engines. If it was metaphor, it was shared across generations. If it was real, then humanity may have witnessed the first craft ever to cross our skies. Fact 24. The Indian parallels. Vimanas. Across an ocean and a millennium away, ancient India tells of Vimanas, flying palaces of the gods. The Sanskrit epics Mahabharata and Ramayana describe radiant chariots that soared through the clouds, powered by fire and sound, capable of destruction and creation alike. They glowed like stars. They carried kings and sages, and they could travel from earth to heaven and back. Compare that to Enoch's account, a crystalline palace that moved through the air, that carried him to the heavens and showed him the mechanics of the universe. Could it be coincidence? or two civilizations recording the same phenomenon through different tongues. No contact existed between the Near East and India in that age. And yet, both speak of gods who flew, machines that shone, and mortals taken aboard to witness the workings of creation. Perhaps the story of Enoch and the flight of the Vimanas are not separate myths, but two chapters of the same forgotten history. Fact 25. Purification and the White Garments. Among the most vivid passages of the Book of Enoch is a moment of transformation. Before being brought into the palace of heaven, Enoch describes being taken to a place filled with fragrance and light. There, he says, the angels bathed him in holy waters of sweet aroma and dressed him in garments white as snow, shining like the sun. For centuries, this was read as ritual purification, a symbol of cleansing the soul before meeting God. But modern scholars note how specific the description is. A washing process, fragrant vapors, followed by clothing made of bright, reflective material. Some interpreters see a parallel with decontamination before entering a sterile or sacred space, a cleansing that sounds more like procedure than poetry. And those white garments, so radiant they glowed from within, could they have been symbolic or literal, protective suits for a journey beyond the earth? Whatever the truth, this scene marks the boundary between man and the divine. A human purified, prepared, and perhaps, for the first time, dressed for the stars. Fact 26. The problem of translations. By the time Europe rediscovered the Book of Enoch, its words had already changed form many times. The original Hebrew was lost. Only fragments survived in Greek and Aramaic, and one complete version in Ge'ez, the ancient tongue of Ethiopia. When Professor Richard Lawrence translated it into English in 1821, he found entire sections unintelligible, so he rewrote them. Later scholars did the same, adding sermons where the text was silent, cutting verses that seemed heretical. Every translation became interpretation, and with each retelling the language grew more religious, less descriptive, less strange. Even the word angel in early Semitic texts simply meant messenger. What if the original writers were describing phenomena, light, movement, voices from the sky, that translators later sanctified into theology? The Enoch we read today may not be the one who wrote, but between the lines of mistranslation, the outline of something real still glimmers, like a reflection under centuries of glass. Fact 27. Metaphor as technology. Imagine trying to describe lightning before knowing what electricity is. Imagine seeing metal that glows, machines that fly, and beings who command the sky, when your language has no word for machine. You would reach for the divine. You would call them gods, angels, spirits. That is the key to Enoch. His book might not describe religion, but contact. What he saw, he wrapped in metaphor, because metaphor was all he had. The chariot of the Great One could have been craft, the fiery palace, an illuminated vessel, the white garments, protection. Even the thunder of heaven might have been the sound of propulsion, not wrath. Centuries later, scribes turned his wonder into worship. But beneath theology lies observation. Metaphor was not deception, it was translation. If the impossible visited the ancient world, how else could they have written it down? Fact 28. Panspermia and the lost branch of humanity. In 1984, astrophysicist Fred Hoyle proposed a radical idea. Life on Earth might not have begun here at all. He called it panspermia, the theory that living material, or even its microscopic precursors, travel through space on comets, dust, or debris, seeding worlds across the galaxy. To some, it was modern speculation, but in the Book of Enoch, the same idea hides in ancient words. The sons of heaven who descend to earth, the human-like beings who teach science, the claim that mankind is their offspring, all echo the same possibility, that we are not creation's beginning, but its continuation. If true, it reframes everything: faith, history, and identity. Humanity would not be a new species, but an outpost, a forgotten branch of an older civilization. And the Watchers? Not spirits, not gods, but perhaps those who came before, returning to remind us what we used to be. Fact 29. The mixing of relatives. Enoch's story of the Watchers and mortal women isn't just theology, it's a genetic myth. He describes sons of heaven taking wives among the daughters of earth, and from their union, a new lineage was born. Giants, heroes, hybrids. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as fantasy. But modern genetics revealed a truth that sounds eerily similar. Humans carry the DNA of other species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, lost cousins who once shared the same world. Interbreeding was not myth, but biology. The bloodlines mixed, creating what we now call humanity. So when Enoch spoke of mingling between worlds, perhaps he was describing not a miracle, but memory, the merging of ancient kin whose stories blurred into legend. And like the Nephilim, their traces remain, written not in scripture, but in the code of our cells. Fact 30. How myths are born. Sometimes history becomes myth not through mystery, but through time. In the 1930s, French explorers visited the Dogon people of Mali. Decades later, anthropologists were astonished. The Dogon knew details about the star Sirius that modern science had only recently confirmed: its invisible companion star, its 50-year orbit. Was it ancient knowledge? Extraterrestrial contact? The truth was simpler and more revealing. The tribe had once hosted a European traveler who shared stories from a book about Sirius. Over years, retellings transformed education into legend and legend into belief. It took only one lifetime for a tale to become a sacred truth. If myth can be born in decades, what happens across millennia? Perhaps the angels, the giants, the watchers were never lies, just memories distorted by awe, repeated until wonder became worship. And maybe that's what the Book of Enoch truly is, not a fantasy, but humanity's oldest echo of a time when the sky itself was close enough to touch. The night holds more than silence. It remembers. The Book of Enoch may have been erased, but its echoes remain in every faith, in every dream of heaven, in every question about where we came from. Sleep well, curious soul, and come back tomorrow. Another story awaits you here in the Night Library.